It's 12 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, and the time just changed this past week. So it was, I guess, spring forward, fall back, so it would have been, what, 1, 11? I don't know. I can't deal with time zone changes. Anyhow, I'm Stephen Downs. Welcome to the eLearning 3.0 Hangout. And joining me right in the nick of time is Ben Werdmuller, and who seems to have no audio.
Oh no!
There he is. We got audio now.
Okay,
and
good.
I just need to make sure present to everyone. Okay, so I believe that you are being presented to everyone. You'd think I'd have the hang of this after all this time, but no. No, I don't. So let's see. See, I press a button and something different happens. Okay, hang on here. So I'm becoming, I guess, known for producing the world's worst. There we go. Okay, good. All right, I'm happy. So you're live. I've just closed the window with the chatter in it, which figures. So let's just reopen that. Oh no, I can't do that. Anyhow, Ben Werdmuller, welcome. Sorry for the confusion. And just for everybody else as well, I've also brought my cat.
Amazing.
Who will be participating, perhaps asking a few questions. Okay, and I am getting comments on the side, so perfect. So Ben, you're located where right now? California?
I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area these days. Came out here little over 7 years ago now. So slowly letting it fade my accent into nothingness.
So I'm here to reassure you that you still have an accent, at least to my ears. I see you've got your Apple Pods in. Very nice, very chic.
Very important to fit in this area, you know.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, I still have the big bulky but noise canceling earphones. You're still with Matter, right?
I'm actually not with Matter. I left Matter in August. So yeah, so I was most recently with Matter, which is an early stage venture firm that actually had previously funded Known, which was an open source startup I worked on. Right now, I'm working on something called Unlock, which is yet another open source startup because I can't get enough. And this one is it's run by Julien Genestou, who previously started something called Superfeeder, and I'm helping him on product and helping him to build an engineering team. But yeah, so Matter ended. It was a wonderful journey, but they're kind of regrouping right now.
Oh, okay. So Matter itself still exists, but is reforming. What will this? It went in one ear and went right out the other. This new project that you're working on, what will it do?
So Unlock is a way for anybody to make money on the web from their work without going through a middleman. So it's whereas you might, if you're selling content on the internet, right now have to go through there are a handful of companies who kind of act as a payment processor. They act as an arbiter as well, of course, of what can be sold. And they kind of act as a gatekeeper. Unlock uses kind of decentralized technologies to get past all that. So it's my first thing I've worked on that's on the blockchain. It's very interesting working on the blockchain as a blockchain skeptic. It's been an interesting adventure, but it's interesting. I think if you get beyond the coin speculation and the kind of slightly nasty Wall Street kind of culture that's grown up around cryptocurrencies and that kind of thing, there's some interesting underlying technology there. So I've been enjoying investigating that, playing with that a little bit.
That's pretty funny because I wrote a note on Mastodon just before this, saying, "Oh, you probably won't be talking about blockchain a whole lot." So,
oh well.
but it worked. It works out fine because the topic in Tuesday's newsletter was blockchain. And distributed ledger technologies generally. So our week that we're doing right now in eLearning 3.0, which of course is the course this is a part of, is titled Graph. And I'm viewing, I don't know if it's really an accepted view, but I'm viewing blockchain as a graph kind of thing. And you know, and in that way, interestingly similar in various respects to artificial intelligence, social networking, and all the rest of it. I see you nodding, so I guess you're agreeing with that.
Yeah, I think so, and I think a misconception of blockchain that a lot of people have is that it's this kind of very private, very sort of opaque technology, and actually, like, those ledgers really are open social networks in a lot of ways. And there's a lot that you can derive and infer from them. And I think it's actually important that anybody who is getting involved in those technologies really understands that fact. And there are actually a lot of privacy implications involved in them. Like, if you're running, a lot of people, like right now, because there's a lot of money in it, people are like, oh, just throw, you know, X on the blockchain, right? And it's and actually a lot of these, not only is it inappropriate for a lot of these use cases, but it's actually a security risk. It's actually like you could actually find out a lot of information about somebody if you find out, you know, what they're paying for, right? Or what their what entries they've added to a let's say if it was a blockchain literally for accreditation. You know, maybe that's an okay thing because you can follow, you know, how they're accredited across the across their institutions, but you also actually remove the ability for that person to control what they can reveal and who they reveal it to, because it's all just open, right? And normally we all have the ability to represent ourselves and choose what sides of ourselves we want to represent. And so there are some really interesting issues there that are probably not talked about enough.
Now, of course, the other side of that is anonymity, and then the possibility for the misuse of a distributed system like blockchain for, say, payments for illegal things or illegal transaction or money laundering, etc. Are you guys addressing that as well? I guess you would have to.
Yeah, and I mean, it's something I care about deeply. I put out a blog post on my site last week about Gab, the white supremacist social network, and they, you know, it's a real risk that decentralized technologies could actually just create a safe haven for those kinds of communities that actually can't be brought down. But again, it's actually not true that blockchain is anonymous. And if you look at, for example, the Silk Road, and kind of what happened there, right? That was an illegal marketplace that was enabled through Bitcoin. They were able to figure out who those people were, and they, you know, you can actually derive an awful lot from the information that's revealed, and you know, it's really important to understand actually how powerful metadata can be for that. On one hand, you know, in those kinds of cases, it's great because you can actually find these people who are causing immense harm, and you can track them down and you can stop them, hopefully, from causing immense harm. On the other hand, for example, if you are revealing metadata in a secure chat application, you have to understand that that metadata can be used to figure out who somebody is and understand a lot about their profile. So metadata is really, really powerful. I don't believe that the blockchain is going to hide people from being discovered, but it does make it undoubtedly makes it harder, and that's something I think a lot about. And I can't say that there are easy answers, but it's something I'm definitely working on.
It's the sort of thing, though. I mean, I think about that because, metadata helps you identify somebody. If you're a large company or a government that can afford to gather and process and analyze that metadata, for you and me, well, maybe for me, I don't know about you, it's not really going to help me, is it? So, you know, it's one thing to say metadata makes things open, but from my perspective, it doesn't help me a bit.
Yeah, and there's, I would agree with that, and I think there's an imbalance in the transparency and opacity of information, which is actually, in my view, the exact opposite of where it should be. And you exactly pointed it, which is that people and entities that have a lot of money have the money to make their activities opaque, and those of us who don't, who have much less power, we're effectively transparent because all our information is laid bare. And there are things that you can do, and obviously I've heavily been involved in the Indieweb movement, which is all about giving people control of their data. I was also about giving people control of their data on earlier projects like Elgg, right, and stuff right. Where we were really thinking very hard, not just about ownership but control. But it's early days here, and there's a real risk that there are unintended consequences of making everything decentralized and making everything open. And it's really, really important. I think it's a civil liberties issue that that individuals who maybe have less power actually have the control that they need over their information and the way they're represented.
So is this going to tie in with Indieweb in some way, or are these two separate streams in your work right now?
Yeah, I think it actually does dovetail, not necessarily on purpose, but it does dovetail. I think the point of Unlock is that anybody can make money from their own site. And so if, for example, you are creating premium content and releasing it on your own website, it will allow you to do that more easily than you could with anything else. And that's a very Indieweb value. The other thing that Unlock does is you don't have to have a monetary amount associated with kind of the access wall that you put up. So you can actually also just think of it as a decentralized access control system. And that is also interesting. So far, the Indieweb has been entirely public, and not all information should be public. There's lots of really important information that people publish on the web as a whole that is sensitive in some way, and the web doesn't have an access control layer in the same way it doesn't have an identity or a payments layer, and creating that access control layer could enable a lot of more private discourse to take place in a more controlled way.
Now, for those who are in the course who might not be familiar with what Indieweb is, I kind of just jumped into the topic. Could you give me the 2-minute sketch? What is it?
So Indieweb is this idea that you should be able to share and discuss and publish from your own website, and ideally from your own domain name, in a way that it is not adversely controlled by any single company, right? And so right now, most of the conversations, most of the discourse that happens on the web happens in spaces that are owned by a very small number of very wealthy companies. Like and Facebook those companies, exactly, yeah. Facebook and Twitter and to some extent LinkedIn, right, in the workspace. And their policies then affect actually the entirety of the discourse that takes place. And so on some level, that's both good and bad, I have to say. So on one level, for example, they're getting better. They have been terrible, but they're getting better at dealing with hate speech, right? And dealing with hate speech is probably a thing that has to happen. On the other side, because their incentives are around making the display advertising that they show more valuable, they disallow certain kinds of activities that should be allowed. So an example of that is Facebook has a real names policy. Right. And what they mean by real names is sort of your government-issued identity. And that might seem like it's okay, but for example, if you're a transgendered user, people were finding in droves that they were being kicked off Facebook for using the names that they had chosen for themselves, and if Facebook was requiring them to use what's called their dead names, the names that they've left behind, and that's a really serious inclusion issue.
Sure.
The other thing is that for example, real names, actually, it creates a chilling effect on the kind of speech that you can have. It does not reduce abuse. That's a common misconception. People using their real names actually are at least as likely to engage in abusive content online, and it does prevent people who are, for example, engaged in activism, particularly in vulnerable communities, particularly in communities that maybe don't have as many democratic protections. It actually means that they're less likely to do those activities, and that's problematic as well. And so what the Indieweb does is it says, listen, you should be able to do all those things. You should be able to chat. You should be able to have events. You should be able to organize, but you should do it in a space that you control, where you decide what the rules are, and every individual does. So I've got my website. I might reply to something that's on your website. The user interface for me is just like it would be on Facebook. It's like it's a continuous discussion, like a conversation that we're having, but it's sort of co-owned between our two websites. And you decide what gets to show up on your website. I get to decide what shows up on my website. And importantly, it does this using very lightweight, very open, very simple web technologies that anybody who is a developer can implement literally in an afternoon and integrate into their platform. So I started a platform called Known that was based on this. There's one called Microblog. There are plugins for WordPress. There's, it's fairly easy if you know HTML, just to embed it in your HTML. The idea is to make it as simple as possible and to lower the barrier to entry as low as it possibly can be.
So, okay, let's talk about that a wee bit. So everybody has their own website. So first of all, I guess, how do you make that happen? Because that's not the easiest thing in the world to make happen.
Yeah, no, it's really not. And actually, I think the big bottleneck to everyone owning their own website is not so much the web technologies as it is hosting.
Yeah.
And I think they're a fantastic host. I'm going to, shout out to Reclaim Hosting, for example, which are wonderful people, and they help people in a very personal way, and it's actually an amazing business. But a lot of these hosts really, they don't give you the environment that really sets you up for success.
Right.
They give you ancient technologies, honestly, some of which are actually just security risks. They have these sort of cPanel installation systems that look like they're from 1997. It's really hard. It's really genuinely very, very difficult. And I do think, like, we're starting to see a new generation of kind of home servers and tools that you can put in your own home. I own something called a Helm that is like this box that just sits in my living room and serves my email and does my I think it's going to expand to include things like hosting over time. And those are starting to be very well-funded projects that people are beginning to see there's a real market for, particularly in, lots of people, I think it's now 30, 40 million homes have Alexas in their in their living rooms, and it's a similar thing. Like it's part of that Internet of Things kind of market, having something in your home that handles your, stores your family photos in a secure way, stores your, and potentially stores your website as well. So I think that's one answer. Another answer is, frankly, at some point you're going to have a web host for ordinary people that has a beautiful kind of 21st century interface, and they're gonna take the market. And it is only a matter of time, because lots of people need websites. But right now, that still has not happened. So it's hard. Things like WordPress make it easier in terms of, once you've actually got the hosting, it's like 5 minutes or less to get up and running with a website. But that first step is undeniably the hardest. And buying a domain name is similarly archaic, unfortunately.
Oh, it's ridiculous, buying domain names, yeah, and it could be cheaper too, I think. Although,
And that's another issue. Like there is an inclusion issue here in terms of like only a certain number of people can afford to, drop the money on a domain name and drop the money on $5 a month for hosting. It doesn't sound like a lot, but for a lot of people, it's really meaningful. And it would be deeply unfair to only allow people who can pay for that to participate in the web. So there have to be other solutions as well. And honestly, if the web is going to be about people learning from each other and sharing their lived experiences and creating kind of a richer tapestry of knowledge and information that we can all learn from, it's got to be about everybody. And so those prices are definitely too high, and there has to be another solution there too.
The other thing with home servers too has been the asymmetric bandwidth. That's a real problem here. Even with this conversation, I'm kind of pushing it a bit. I have so-called broadband, but my broadband isn't very broad.
It's funny, like being in the San Francisco area, I would have thought that the infrastructure would be amazing. And the internet would be amazing, and it is living in a developing nation for lots of reasons, actually, as observers of the US might know. But nothing works. It's actually incredible that this is one of the technology centers of the world. So yes, I'm very familiar with that problem. Incredibly bandwidth here is terrible as well, and of course, the ISPs are partially incentivized to keep it that way. They want you to download, and really, if you're going to be uploading and serving from your connection, they want you to have a much more expensive business connection.
Yeah, exactly. Now the other side of Indieweb is the simple HTML that you talked about, which connects things together. Now, I'm dense. I don't find it particularly simple. Especially, so I have a website, you have a website, you write something, I write something on my website. How does that happen? How does that happen? How does that connection form?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think it's worth saying as well before I go into the details of it that HTML inherently is not simple, right? It's kind of it's web development. And that again, that's got a high barrier to entry. So it's really important that there are simple tools that people can just pick up and use. But the way it works is, let's say you've written an ordinary blog post on your site. I then write a reply on my site, and it every HTML tag can have a class associated with it, which we normally use. We normally think of those in terms of being used for CSS, for styling.
Yeah.
But actually, they can be used for all kinds of things. And so these tags can add semantic information to the HTML. And so what I'm doing is adding, when I'm writing my post, I'm adding tags that say, okay, this is in reply to, right? And I have a link back to you, but that link is saying, okay, this is actually the link that says this is what this post is in reply to. And I've got more tags on my page that say, okay, this post was authored by Ben Werdmuller, here's my user icon, that kind of thing.
Right.
You hopefully have similar kind of semantic tags on your blog post that say, okay, Stephen Downs, here's your profile information. And then I send something called, once we both have this markup, I send something called a web mention. And a web mention is just a really simple ping, a post request that says, okay, here's the origin post, and here's the destination post. The post in reply to, and the post that it's actually replying to. And then your site goes back and it says, okay, I'm going to quickly read your HTML just to see if that's actually true. Are you linking to me? Does this have the right markup? And if it is, you can choose what to do with that. Your site can say, okay, well, I'm going to post that as a comment underneath. It might just notify you. Some people don't display them. It's your choice because it's your site. But it's all about that very, very lightweight markup, and then that just the tiniest, thinnest of pings, the post request with just a single line of data that says, okay, hey, go check this out. Your site checks it out, reads the data to verify it.
So your website has to support this.
Yeah.
So yeah. WordPress supports this. I guess it's a plugin, right?
Yeah, WordPress supports it as a plugin. There have been some really great community plugins that have been created.
Yeah.
Known and microblogs support them
Right.
kind of out of the box inherently, and there's more to come. And then quite a few people have written other CMSs at this point as well.
Sure. Yeah. So those are the two parts: the web mention, the pinging thing, and the what do we call them? H10.
Micro formats is the technical term.
Okay.
Yeah, and so you can go to microformats.org to if you're technically minded to learn more about that. The important thing, though, is actually not so much the tags and the microformats and the web mentions and those kinds of things. The important thing is that you have your own website. And it's, I think, absolutely true that if you have your own website and maintain your own website, you can still share on all the social networks, right? You can still have the benefit of all of that audience.
Yeah.
But you're probably going to outlast all of the startups, all of the technology companies that come along and actually want to own your posts. Like, I literally, you know, when I was doing Elgg exists in large part because of a post on OL Daily, right? Which is a long time ago. That was, you know, 2003. Your site is still around and is still doing, you know, it's still this hub for the community, but it's yours and it's under your control. And that's a really important concept. You know, it's you know, at the time, for example, you know, when all of that was happening, Elgg was described as, you know, MySpace is around. So, you know, these companies actually have a very short shelf life. They're designed to have a short shelf life because of the way venture capital works. Owning your own site means that your voice can stand the test of time.
At least as long as I'm around, anyways. And then we have to depend on Internet Archive.
Well, but then, I mean, the Internet Archive is also amazing, and if you allow the archive to take, you know, to take your site and keep archives of your site, you know, if you've never been to the Internet Archive, by the way, it's actually incredible. It's like this church of data, a literal church of data, with the servers and the pews and that kind of thing. But they are going to be around forever, and I think they are a wonderful service to this community as well.
I certainly hope they're around forever, or at least for an appreciably long time. They're a great service. I've used them since forever. My only complaint is that they started too late, so some of my earliest websites aren't there, which is a complaint I guess a lot of people don't have. So I guess so okay. So let's think about this. We've got this decentralized web that we've produced through Indieweb. Then what? Like, why are we doing this? I know I get the question about ownership, but if you didn't care about ownership, why would you be doing this?
Yeah, so if you don't care about ownership and control, there are still lots of reasons to have your own website. One of them is simply a lot of people care about audience and career. Like let's look at the sort of the very self-centered kind of view on this, which is that if you are constantly adding to a site that you own and that is your kind of brand, is your asset, if you like, you are constantly adding value to that, versus if you're constantly posting on Facebook and Twitter, and that's your primary place that people look to find things from you, you're adding value to them. And if you are, you know, you're basically putting your value in a place that is subject to their policies and subject to their financial success and subject to their whims. So you know, if you're putting, for example, on a business card, you know, your Twitter account or your Facebook account or your Google-controlled blog or something like that, you are trusting that they are going to be good stewards of your voice. Whereas if you are creating your own site, you are your own steward of your voice, and you get to choose the form of that. You get to decide exactly what form that voice should take, and what how best to represent yourself on the web. You're not fitting into their templates. You are creating your own template for yourself, and that's a really important idea, I think, because the kind of the interfaces and the forms that these social networks create actually do have an impact on, again, the kind of discussion that takes place, right? There's no doubt that a lot of the, for example, political discourse we've seen is a direct result of Twitter's length format, which is crazy but true. And so if you have your own site, your site might be incredibly different if you are, let's say, an instructional designer, to if you are a business person, to if you're a writer or whatever. Like you can choose what really makes you shine in the best in the best possible way. And then having these micro formats, having these underlying technologies under the hood as well, not only does it help other people who maybe also have Indieweb sites to discuss with you, and it helps you build an audience there, but it's just good for stuff like SEO. Like, it helps you be found. It actually helps you rise above the other websites that are there, because if you're updating your site regularly, right? If you have a great feed, if you have structured data, those all turn out to be things that search engines love as well. And there's all kinds of other stuff that can be derived from your site, your data. So it's all of that is really beneficial. And I have to say, in my personal experience, every single major career advance I've had in my life has come from my blog. From publishing papers, that were picked up by your site, thank you again, to like the stuff that I wrote on Elgg that was then picked up and led into the next job, and so on and so on. There's been very, very little disadvantage to me putting my voice out, and I think that's true for most people. I will acknowledge a certain amount of sort of privilege there, because I have been able to have my site, I have been able to have my domain, and I've been lucky enough to meet some incredible people who have shared my message. But I think it's generally true that if you publish and write well and share your ideas, the downside is very limited.
Yeah, it's been my experience as well. I barely publish at all in academic journals and things like that. I put it on my website and people find it, and the work speaks for itself. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's not a good thing. I have different directions I want to go. I have found, working with my own website, that I need to differentiate between different kinds of content on the website. For example, between articles and posts and what might be called micro content. And one of the things I've been saying with Indieweb is it's all one big smoosh where you've got people using it as Twitter and other people using it as the Saturday Evening Post and everything in between. It's hard to sort out. What do you think about there being different kinds of data, or different, I don't know what to say, different Indiewebs for different types of data, or just do you get what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And then, yeah, no, I think that, and I think there's lots of different versions of that. I think there's literally the different content forms. So there's the short notes versus bookmarks versus long essays and photos and all of those things. And I think it is important to keep them separate. One of the first things I did when I was building Known for myself was I created this sort of menu system that allowed you to filter between them. And I choose actually to have just blog posts show up. Like if you visit word.io, you just see the blog posts, because that's what I care about revealing to a user. But they don't need to see. I post short notes much less these days, but I feel like people don't necessarily need to see my off the cuff comments about the midterm elections. You know, that's not necessarily going to put me in the best light to someone who doesn't know me. Versus, you know, here is this post I wrote about the design thinking cycle and how ethics fit into it. Right? It's a very different context. And so I think thinking about audience there is really important. If you are writing for an audience, and you don't have to be, you could just be writing for yourself. But having the ability to kind of split streams is important. But I also think people have different identities and personas in different contexts, and they don't necessarily all need to bleed into each other. I have this very kind of open sourcey, you know, kind of data ownership kind of persona, which I use for work, which is, you know, these are all things I care very deeply about in my work. I also, you know, I write fiction in my spare time, and I like to draw, and, you know, those kinds of things. And I'm a giant Doctor Who nerd, and those kinds of things don't need to all live in the same spot. And I would love to have, you know, a discussion about the, you know, the references to 1989 Doctor Who stories, like in the 2018 kind of series, you know, and have that with people. I don't need to have that with the same people who are, you know, thinking about me in this work context. So those can be separate sites. There's nothing to stop you from having there's nothing to stop you from having multiple sites and multiple personas. Link them if you want, leave them unlinked if you want, use different names even if you want. You know, there's nothing that says your identity has to be joined up. The idea that identity has to be joined up is very much one that comes from companies who have an incentive to join up your identity because they want to sell things to you.
I've been using my website, as you may know, also to have the online course, and so I've been putting out different types of data, like, for example, modules, course modules, and events, and a page for different authors and things like that. So I've tried to break down my site into different types of data and then create graphs out of that. But of course, that leads to the question of sharing that kind of information. Do you see that ever happening, or is that a pipe dream?
I definitely see that happening. That's I think this comes as well from the you know, this relates back to this idea of templated discourse, where the kinds of information that we've seen are actually, you know, the kinds of information that we've seen popularly shared are really just the kinds of information that people think they can sell ads against in a mainstream way. Yeah. There's nothing to stop you from having, you know, courses as shareable content, or information behind the courses as shareable content, as graph information as shareable content, from, you know, indie games as shareable content. Anything, sure. You know, exactly. Bread recipes is the example I used to give. Like it, and that can be a completely, you know, its own kind of content. There's nothing to stop that from happening, and I think part of independence really is breaking out of those templates. The thing that is still a barrier there is this programming barrier, the fact that you have to mark up with HTML, you know, you've got to write your own tools, that kind of thing. And so the closer we can get to usable hosting, usable CMSs that allow you to create your own kind of content types in a way that lets you use, you know, the device of your choice, whatever, you know, in the context that makes sense to you. That all of those things allow you to be freed from those constraints. The trick is getting there involves an ecosystem, and people who build ecosystems still have to pay rent. So there is kind of a where does, you know, who sponsors that ecosystem? Where does it come from? And it can be from an army of people who are volunteering and giving their free time and working on things on their own, as many great technologies. You know, many great technologies have been created that way, but I think it does need a concerted effort. And so the Indieweb community is fantastic for that. I think there's definitely room for more communities, you know, with similar aims to do similar things. I think we need to get to a more usable independent web, and that's the that's going to have to be the next big step.
Yeah, I think so too. I look at even a simple thing like if I'm sitting on your website reading something you've written, and I want to write a comment on that, and which I often do. And except when I'm on Medium, I don't want to write a comment when I'm on Medium, because if I write a short little thing, it'll show up as a post, which is just wrong. Yeah. But what I want as a user is a box where I type in my comment, and then it shows up on my website the way I want it to, and all the linking happens automatically. Something like that. Now, is blockchain going to give us that?
Blockchain is not going to give us that. The what is going to give us that is this idea of a social reader. And there's two things: the social reader and the more connected browser. So the social reader is where I subscribe to your feed, and I'm reading your feed, and from the feed reader, I can then respond, and it works all this magic behind the scenes. So it's like I'm reading a feed on a social network, but actually, you know, it's being stored on my website. It's sending you the web mention, all of those things, and those exist. Those are you know, they're all projects, but they're really great projects, and I think that will continue to develop in a really positive way. And feed readers in general, by the way, are having a major comeback right now in this current context. We'll never get Google Reader back, but we're going to get you know, some really great new 2018 equivalents.
That would be nice.
Sorry.
That would be nice, because I've been seeing it go the other way. Like even with Firefox dropping its RSS support, you know, it's hard to get that. I mean, to get that back.
Yeah, I think I think it's about smaller tools that are loosely joined. Like one of the things that Firefox, I have no knowledge of, inside knowledge of this, but my assumption is that the folks at Firefox realized that they were throwing too many kind of, it was becoming a bit too much of a Swiss Army knife again, which was the problem with the Mozilla browser that preceded it. And it's, I think, slimming down and having you know, doing one thing well, but then working really well with another thing that does this other thing well, et cetera, and having this ecosystem of interoperable tools is probably the way to go. I do think, though, that there is room for identity in the browser. And I do think we will eventually get there. And one of my revelations about blockchain is that those folks, by accident, have got closer to identity in the browser than anyone else has. Because effectively, these little wallets, like the MetaMask that sits in the browser, there is an identity there. And they actually have quite a large installed base. So, and they have their own browsers that actually supply that as a built-in feature. And I know some of the browsers are, you know, Opera, I think, has a wallet already. Some of the others are considering it.
Brave, for example.
And then there's Brave, yeah, which is, I think, always going to be kind of a niche browser, but it has, it's pioneering a lot of those ideas. And I do think that that's where those kind of those two different decentralized communities can intersect. But quite how that will happen, I'm not quite sure yet. I have ideas about how to push it along a little bit, but it's but I do think there's something really really interesting there. In general, the way that blockchain has actually made people see value in decentralization, a different kind of value, but still see value in decentralization, I think that's not entirely unhelpful. I think that's I think that's going to lead to some interesting places too.
Yeah, I think it's had a number of very useful consequences. It's one of, you know, looking into blockchain is one of the major reasons why I pursued this e-learning 3.0 course. With identity in the browser, now of course that takes us back to the days of OpenID, and as you know what happened to OpenID, we got Facebook login, Google login, and it was basically appropriated and centralized. How do we prevent that this time, or do we?
No, we absolutely have to. Yeah. So the big problem with OpenID, it was a great technology underlying it. It was fundamentally unusable. Most people don't understand what a URL is, and that's hard. Actually, if you say that to a lot of open web advocates, they're going to be like, "No, of course not. People know what a URL is. They can use URLs. They really can't." Yeah, it's hard. And most people reach Facebook to log into it by searching for Facebook. So that's just how it goes. And so the big thing that all open communities and anybody building software, but particularly people who build ethical software, need to do is make sure that it's usable. And the way that you make sure the projects are usable is you test them early and you test them often with the people you're actually trying to help. So that means having someone in mind that you are actually trying to help, starting with not like everybody or the entire web, but like a small group of users that you actually know and you can get to know and develop insights around, right? And from there, you build prototypes. And prototypes can literally mean drawing pictures with Sharpies on a piece of paper, right? It doesn't have to mean building code, and probably shouldn't mean building code to begin with. But you create these Sharpie prototypes, you put them in front of these people that you're really trying to help, and you just shut up and listen and let them tell you what their feedback is, right? And based on what you learn from them, you iterate, you make another prototype, you test again, and you keep going, right? And this kind of human-centered design is an enormously important part of building technologies that really help people, that meet their kind of unmet needs. And it's a bit like journalism. It's a bit like, a research project. It's understanding people deeply and being willing to identify your own assumptions and not just say, I know what everyone needs. I'm like, I'm going to be the savior, right, of the web. It's about like being able to understand people, understand your assumptions, test those assumptions in a real way, and adjust what you're doing based on what you discover. It's a really kind of academic, scientific process. And it's vital. And OpenID did not do that. I think a lot of technologies didn't do that. What Facebook and Twitter and Google saw was that people were having trouble with the URL, and they actually made the login easier by removing that part, by basically logging in their own URLs, right? And so by going through that process, you're able to see that earlier. Stop yourself from building something that is kind of eat your greens, right? Which people aren't really going to do, and build something that actually meets users where they're at and really serves their need from their perspective. And the more that we can add user-centered design into ethical and decentralized software development, the more effective it's going to be, basically. So
how do you get this has always puzzled me. It genuinely puzzled me. I mean, this isn't a leading question for the purpose of an interview on a course. How do you get from that to an ecosystem? Because, I mean, what you're talking about is a minimal viable product. And a lot of the time, the product is not viable without the rest of the ecosystem, right? It's like, inventing one telephone, or, well, yeah, something, you know what I mean. So,
yeah.
And I don't see how to get from here to there. If I want to see a distributed Indieweb, say, it's got to do the things that I need it to do, but that means, it's got to do more than one thing.
Yeah, it does. But you don't have to start with the universe. So just like you don't have to start with the audience being everybody, you don't have to start with the feature set being everything. And so rather than minimum viable product, I like to think of a minimum desirable experience. So what is the smallest thing that meets a need for the person that you're trying to serve, right? And so if you can find that one thing, that small thing that you start with, that is actually useful for user number one, right, before there are other people using it, and that might just be an easier in a way that they're able to build more of an audience and be able to, for example, enhance their professional career. Or it might be that they're able to sell their
their
work online, or it might be something else, right?
Right.
you're able to identify and do that really, really well, and make these that first thing, then that gives you a really good solid place from where you're able product based on ideology alone. And that's something I have. That's hard learned. Let's put it that way. Because I definitely came into the industry thinking, oh no, nobody's doing this, but of course I'm going to create this open community platform, and it's going to be great, and it's just going to work. And it's super, super hard. And the only way that you can, succeed is by being useful to people, basically. And so you know, is it desirable? Is it something that people want? This small thing. Is it feasible? Can you actually build it? It's not made of magic. It's made of code. And is it viable? Is it something that they will actually pay for? And it's not like you don't have to be making a profitable business from user one, but you have to be able to conceivably conceivably show that the user one is finding it useful, and that at user, depending on the business, 100,000, right? You are, it's a business. Maybe if you're a user orientated platform, you're talking about user, 1 million or user 10 million, but those are all ad supported platforms. And maybe if you're building ethical software, you don't want to be building ad supported platforms anymore. So what is the, how can you get to a place where you are able to provide something that's desirable, viable, and feasible? From this very, very small place from which you're able to grow. It's a hard dance. These things are always hard dances, but they are, I think that's the way you build something that actually has sustainability. The thing that always helps, to be really prosaic about it, is money. Right. So we're in an interesting place where even venture capitalists are beginning. Talk is not necessarily a positive thing. Not all of them see it, but it's becoming more of a trend. And we're also in a place where we're seeing alternative funding, like crowdfunding, like revenue-based
thing.
Yeah, and revenue-based funding is also a thing where you an investor puts money in and they just get a multiple of revenue over time. That works if the investment amounts are very small. Doesn't work if the amount is very large, because obviously the multiples are insane. Yeah. But but the other thing is, it doesn't have to be a for-profit business. And if there were spaces for, if there were more spaces, for example, in the academic community, to sponsor projects like this in a sustainable way, with the understanding that software is never really finished and it's an iterative process, that would have a real effect on the industry as a whole, and also the software that was available, for example, in an educational context. Sure. And so sponsoring people to create ethical software in a human-centered way, I think, has to be an important part of the ecosystem. The web, very clearly, did not commercial context. Actually, a lot of this did not. And finding homes for them that are not VC and probably aren't Silicon Valley has to be an important part of that too. So, like, not just creating this human-centered cycle and really understanding the people you're building for, but actually truly supporting people who do that, so that they can, one of the major problems with open source software is that people who build it generally find themselves in financial difficulty. Right. And removing that barrier is crucial for the ecosystem as well.
Okay, well, my bandwidth has been complaining for the last 10 minutes or so. And we're coming up on an hour, so I think we'll have to wrap it up here. But I really appreciate the time you've taken to come and talk with us on the e-learning 3.0 course. We've had viewers throughout, of course, not a lot, because that's the way it always works. But I'm sure that many more people will be watching this recording. It's certainly worth watching. If they want to contact you, they just reach you through your website?
That's right. That's word.io. But yeah, happy to chat. I am also on the silos, so come find me on Twitter, but find me on Mastodon as well. And yeah, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you. And we'll talk again, I'm sure.
Okay, take care.
Okay.